Hello everyone, and welcome to Standing for Truth Ministries. We are excited to present to you this edition of The Quest for the Age of the Earth. When we type into Google, how old is the Earth? What do you see? Billions of years old.
You sure about that?
But as biblical creationists, we say the Earth is young. How can we answer this radiometric dating problem? Is it really a problem? Today, we are going to do just that. Let's begin our journey by looking at the days of creation. The idea that the Earth was young has always been around, simply by following the genealogies back in time to Adam. And since Adam was created on day 6, then it follows logically that the Earth itself was only created days before. The Jews themselves believed this, only until recently, after the advent and popularity of evolution theory grew. Before that, they were all young Earth creationists. Even their calendars today still reflect this. Scholars today admit that it is clear that the author of Genesis intended for the days of creation to be viewed as literal 24-hour days. So with radiometric dating methods giving results for not only millions, but billions of years old, how can we possibly say that the Earth is young in contrast to this data? Let's jump right into this and find out. First, what is radiometric dating? The quick answer is, it's a type of dating method that looks at a particular radioactive element that breaks down over time, and as it breaks down, it converts the parent isotope into a daughter isotope. Different isotopes break down at different rates, in what are known as half-lives. Some are extremely long, others are not. So the first question we need to ask is, how accurate are these dating methods? For that, we need to look at what is known as homogeneity. This refers to a sample having evenly distributed radioactive isotopes in a rock sample. So again, how accurate are these methods? Well, a study just came out recently answering just that question. The study specifically looked at how accurate radiometric dating actually is. They looked at a massive database of over 18,000 samples of 29,000 different radioactive ages from the USGS National Geochronological Database. Now, to understand what you are about to see, we are going to do a crash course in chart reading. Before you is a chart that shows the age in millions of years on the left, with the half-life at the bottom. And in the middle of the chart, you are looking at a dating method of lead to lead. In it, you can see two different red diamond shapes. Those are two different results from the same method, and the bar that extends out from them is the margin of error bar. In this picture, you can see both dating methods are the same and both align closely. Therefore, the term we use is that they are concordant with one another, and they have continuity within the sample. This is exactly what they're looking for accuracy. We also want to see the margin of error bars overlap when multiple dating methods are used on a sample. This is very important and the goal for any dating method to achieve for an accurate date. Two dots mean they got two different results for the same method. That is obviously not good either. What you do not want to see in the same dating method giving different results in the same error bar. And even worse is when not even the error bars of margin overlap. This would result in an unreliable date and give a low score of confidence. The worst score given in the study is 0.00. This means not a single dating method aligned with one another. So remember, error bars need to overlap for at least some concordance, even if they did not align within those error bars. The goal is to always have everything be in a straight line across the board. That would give a score of 1.0, and we would find continuity throughout the sample, as all dating methods were concordant with one another. One last thing, the bar on the right shows you the color of the atomic weight for each element. You can also see the type of rock next to the score in every image. So to recap, we have a massive study that contains 18,575 records with 29,043 age determinations using 8 different types of radioisotope methods. Now, let's look at our first sample. Here we see an example of multiple dating methods used on the same sample. We see there is little to no concordance with any of the dating methods, and not even uranium-235 agreed with uranium-236. This gives a very low score of only 0.23. The next sample, at least the uranium and the lead dating were concordant with one another, but potassium to argon and rubidium to strontium and lead to lead were not even remotely close. So if you were only dating this sample with, let's say, thorium to lead, you would get results telling you that granite rock is around 550 to 600 million years old. But if you were only testing it using potassium to argon or rubidium to strontium, you would believe that the rock is 1,250,000 years old. And if you only tested it using lead to lead, you would get a result of around 1,600,000 years old. So if you did not test the rock with any other method, you would be dating the sample and publishing the results with whatever method was used, which would not agree with any of the other methods. This ranks a feeble 0.07 and is considered untrustworthy results, basically a worthless sample. Let's also not forget that these dates land on different geologic layers. Talk about a disaster. Next, look at this mess. You can see, following the two red arrows at the top of the weight scale, both go to uranium-238 results. Yet they are both giving dates on the opposite end of the spectrum. Not only are they extremely discordant, but they do not even remotely reach even close to the margin of error bars. So what date are they going to use? Which one are they going to publish? Again, another disaster. And we see little concordance when we look at this sample. Now look at this disaster. Imagine you pull this out of the testing machine and you notice that the entire sample has radioactive isotope distribution throughout the entire thing with zero continuity, and one of the dates literally gives you a negative reading for the age of the Earth. How do you even try to explain that? This scored a 0.08. Now that we just looked at bad scores, let's look at a good one. Here you can see that the dating method margin of errors overlapped. This is good because it shows a concordance and ranks this sample at 0.92. However, notice that even with this high score, you still can give results off by hundreds of millions of years. How is that an effective dating method? It's not. So even though they scored extremely high, this is another fail, even though they would say this has some continuity with strong concordant results. I mean, look at this. Lead to lead dates over 11 million years, but rubidium to strontium date only 300 million. So what geological age are you going to place this sample in? It makes no sense. This is another disaster, giving a score of 0.00. We also see a common theme here: weight distribution throughout the rock sample. That brings us to the next question. What about isochron dating? The results revealed that each radioisotope method yielded concordant ages internally, meaning between the whole rock and the mineral ages, but significant discordance between ages from different dating methods. That's what we've been looking at the charts. The examples were found in all four categories of isochron discordance described by Austin in 2000. 1. 2 or more discordant whole rock isochron ages. 2. A whole rock isochron age older than the associated mineral isochron ages. 3. 2 or more discordant mineral isochrons from the same rock. And 4. A whole rock isochron age younger than the associated mineral isochron ages. So without beating a dead horse, we find 3 major things to take away from the study. The results of radiometric dating, including isochron, are only 53% accurate when testing the database for concordance and continuity. This is so bad, it is on the same level of accuracy as tossing a coin. And even from the same radioactive isotope dating methods can give results off by hundreds of millions of years. So even high-scoring concordant results that do have continuity in them can still be off by massive amounts of time and give a huge error for margin, which means that even the good results are far from accurate. Imagine you go to a fair and someone says they can guess your age for a prize. You say, okay, go ahead. They say, alright, you're anywhere between 0 and 54. You would just roll your eyes and throw your hands up in the air, because that range is so broad that it explains nothing. This is exactly what we see with these results. Even the highest scores of continuity show massive ranges in dates, and the reoccurring pattern of radioactive isotope distribution by weight was not expected by evolutionists at all. And actually, this was first discovered and published by the rate team, who documented that they found the exact same pattern in the rocks listed here. And this study found a similar pattern reported by the rate team, with the heavier isotopes tending to yield older ages. This discontinuity is actually answered by our model easily when we look at what is known as closure time. So closure time refers to when lava cools and solidifies. The radioactive elements inside it stop moving around, so they are locked in place, and we can later measure their decay to help date the rock. So if lava solidifies faster than its closure time, it can lead to a situation where the radioactive elements don't get trapped properly. Essentially, cooling too quickly could freeze the isotopic system in a way that doesn't allow the isotopes to reach equilibrium. Different minerals have different closure rates. So we, as young Earth creationists, would expect a lot of discontinuity because after the flood, the solidification and closure time of rocks would vary, but would still be much more rapid than evolution would ever account for in their model. Thus, radioactive isotope distribution would be trapped in very different gradients within the rock, causing discordant results like we see. This is why we typically see rocks yielding ages from the oldest to the youngest based on their atomic weight of different radioactive elements. Something that for us young Earth creationists helps explain the geologic column ages, and easily for the first time ever. So again, for us young Earth creationists, the closure time of many rocks would be much faster than assumed via evolution, because we are moving from a rapid plate tectonic hot environment with rapid lava production at the Mid-Atlantic Ridge to a cold Ice Age environment right after the flood. So not only does our model best explain why this discontinuity found within the majority of rocks exist, but our model also better explains why 90% of all radioactive elements are on Earth's crust, and why the distribution of these radioactive elements, like uranium and thorium, are mostly found in Australia, with about 33% of the world's resources of uranium and 20% of the world's thorium. Their uneven distribution worldwide is best explained through Noah's flood. Not only that, but it is our model that predicted rapid runaway plate subduction during Noah's flood, and not only exactly what layers would be discovered to have evidence of this rapid plate movement, which was just recently confirmed, but also that we would find evidence of this rapid plate subduction in the form of cold slabs near Earth's core, which was also confirmed. We also predicted that mudstone, shale, and limestone were deposited rapidly by moving water during the flood, and the recent empirical evidence demonstrates that laminated clays must be deposited in energetic settings just like moving water. Laboratory experiments show us that water flowing between 10 and 20 inches per second created ripples, and laminated carbonate mud layers are identical to those observed in carbonate rocks today. Why are there so few fossil meteor impact craters when we look in the entire geologic column? The fossil record is basically void of them. They find a maximum of 200 total, but yet the Earth was supposedly formed from meteor bombardment over eons of time. Why are there so few? It's so easy to explain from our perspective in our model. We found all of these pieces of evidence confirming biblical creationist predictions. So if biblical creation isn't true, why are we getting so many predictions correct? So to wrap up this section, this study found some wild things. Some samples resulted in dates older than the Earth itself, while others even gave negative ages for the Earth. The majority of dating methods all date different from one another. These were called systematic discordances, and they were all over the place. And finally, there should not be any order to the dating results given from different radioactive isotopes within a sample, yet there is. This study discovered, even when comparing the same dating method, let's say argon to argon as an example, the results did have much more continuity between them, giving a good isochron dating result. However, the moment any other dating method was introduced, the results get more and more discordant with less and less continuity. Meaning, the more dating methods tested together on a sample, the worse the results became. Just look at this chart, showing only 3 different dating methods tested for isochron accuracy and continuity, we see random noise, little continuity, with the majority of the results only scoring around 0.45 to 0.50 and below. Most results fell on the lower end, when in reality, the results should show the majority of the results on the far right side, scoring 1.0 and descending less and less as discordant dates vanish altogether. Instead, we see the exact opposite. They literally discovered, doing this study, that the more dating methods used on a sample, the more the results disagreed with one another and the less accurate they became. So imagine if they used all the different dating methods on a single sample, the results would be even worse and less than 50%. Think about that. Let's not forget the fact that basically every time they date something of known age using radiometric dating, their results came back off by an order of magnitude. As you can see here, everything from potassium to argon dating, argon to argon, rubidium to strontium, all failed to obtain results anywhere near the known date of rock formation. So if they can't get rocks of known ages correct, what makes anyone think they can get rocks of unknown ages correct? So if everything is calibrated to radiometric dating, and it's wrong this often, then is it any real surprise why the masses believe in deep time? You may be thinking, okay, so what? Who cares? Who cares if even any of these dating methods agree with one another? Or even if they're reliable? The fact is, they still give dates of millions and billions of years old, and you say the Earth should be young. And you're right. So now let's answer that. This brings us to the next topic, initial quantity. And this takes us to the discovery of iron formation, where we read on Montclair State University's website, in the research journal of Adaminko and colleagues, published by Ludwik Kowalski, we read, the first is that these experiments were followed by short-term but unbelievably powerful emissions, X-rays, gamma rays, light rays, etc. The second is the formation of new elements, both the entire spectrum of Mendeleev's periodic table and such super heavy elements that nobody had ever suspected their existence. These are transuranium and rare isotopes. There is an example. The most distributed isotope of iron is iron 56. Its proportions of the total weight of iron amounts to approximately 92%. And there is a rare isotope called iron 57. There is even a small amount of it at almost 2.2%. Do you notice that? Do you notice anything? The experiment formed the exact ratio of both iron elements that we find in nature today, both iron 56 at 91.75% and iron 57 at 2.2% and iron 54 at 5.85%. So this was the first time we actually witnessed actual elements being formed in a lab, and they formed exactly how they exist today. The scientist went on to work for the Proton 21 laboratories in Ukraine, bringing his knowledge with him and experience. The facility is now closed because of the war, but during operations they were using cold fusion to produce elements of all type, through a process called Z-pinch, which is a high electrical discharge of plasma shot through a tube and used to strike a pure piece of copper. Once hit, the results of the discharge were super heavy elements that rapidly decayed into all of the elements that we have on Earth today in the same proportions that they are in, including the radioactive ones, but with one amazing new piece of evidence. When they form the entire decay chain with higher proportions of daughter elements than ever even remotely considered or thought possible. This is pivotal information to know, since evolution assumes that the decay process, let's say from uranium to lead, which is a slow process over time, down the entire decay chain, must have taken place. So you see, when scientists looked in a zircon crystal, they noticed lead. As zircon crystals form, they trap the surrounding environment around them, but lead cannot get inside. So how did it get there? They noticed that molten rock has a mixture of radioactive elements, like uranium and thorium. So their assumption became, molten rock has this mixture of uranium and thorium, and only through their decay has all of this lead formed. So, as zircon crystals formed, it trapped only the nearby uranium and thorium, and then all of the daughter elements slowly formed through the decay process chain, slowly, over millions of years, which is based on how much lead they discovered. But now we go back to the Proton 21 laboratory results, and we can see that the elements they formed are again what we find in nature as the natural ratio. And this got me thinking, what radioactive isotopes formed and what are their ratios? So the first one I found was hafnium, which has a half-life of just 31 years. And as you can see, the experiment made far more than we see in the natural environment. When it was created, it rapidly decayed into daughter isotopes, and this higher ratio will we see when looking at all of the different radioactive isotopes. This was shocking and amazing to find, and I was onto something. When I first found a link to the formation of aluminum, I got excited, since aluminum is one of the most abundant metallic elements on Earth, and third out of all elements on Earth. Since the isotope of aluminum-26 has a half-life of 717,000 years, now we have an element that can be used to test the age of the Earth and see if it actually is young or old. This image shows what they expected to find. The light blue is the natural amount found in nature, and the red is what was expected to form based on deep time, since they believe billions of years have passed and there should be little aluminum-26 left. But what did we find? The same ratio exists today. It is as though not a single half-life has even occurred, meaning that the Earth would not even be 1 million years old according to this data. You see, magnesium-26 is the daughter isotope of aluminum-26, so if billions of years had actually passed on Earth like they claim, and aluminum is the most abundant metallic element on Earth, then based on the ratios of its formation, we should have much more magnesium-26 than we do. But we don't. We have the same today as the experiment made. So what about aluminum-42? Well, that decays into calcium-42, which is stable. What do we see again from the Proton 21 lab results? You guessed it. So if this ratio was tested for age, the amount of calcium-42 that formed would have dated 104,400 years old. Yet, it formed in the day the experiment data was collected. So what does evolution theory assume based on the past and radioisotope formation? Well, scientists believe that the initial radioactive isotope ratio can be inferred by analyzing the isotopic composition of non-radioactive stable daughter isotope elements from that decay chain. So they assume the initial quantity, and it looks something like this. But what did we find instead? You guessed it, the exact opposite. Massive amounts of daughter elements in the decay chain formed. The entire decay chain formed with all daughter isotopes forming at once in much higher ratios than the parent isotopes. These daughter isotopes all began rapidly decaying into lead after being trapped within the crystal. So much daughter element formed that if tested, it would have dated millions and even billions of years old, even though it had just formed days earlier. This also explains why so much helium is still on zircon crystals, even though very little should be inside them. You cannot have 4.6 billion years of decay occurring and still expect to find much, if any, helium left inside of these zircon crystals, yet we do. These results are repeated so much by the lab that they actively sold technetium-99, lutetium-177, and iodine-131 to use them for medical imaging devices. So clearly this was not some fake laboratory making outrageous claims. This is what some of the critics have said. But let's just say that it was fake for sake of argument. Okay, now you're going to have to claim that two places on the opposite sides of the world obtained the same results using different technology. That's right, Arion Technology has also created elements inside their chamber as well. These images show you all of the different elements that they created. But as usual, I am interested in either the radioactive isotopes or the daughter element of the radioactive decay chain. Either one is going to be amazing evidence for young Earth creation. And guess what? I found just that.
Out of the 11 most abundant inorganic elements found in the interstellar medium, 9 were also found in the sapphire reactor chamber after an experiment. They were not there before the experiment.
And then we have carbon with barium, titanium, zinc, chromium,
nickel, and iron.
Once it was obvious this was occurring, further analysis revealed that sapphire was actually producing 17 elements. used so far.
And lanthanum and cerium.
All things you wouldn't expect to see.
Two of those were lanthanum and cerium,
So then how far out are we?
both of which are rare earth elements.
Well, let's just map this up.
Now cerium is at the bottom of a massive decay chain, and it's stable, just like lead 206 and 208 are. So if you found it, you would assume it was there from the decay process, and therefore it must be old. You would be wrong in this assumption. So again, if we were to find this element today, we would assume that it came from the decay process based on it being a stable daughter byproduct element formed through the decay process chain, and we would all be wrong. Since that initial starting assumption is wrong, then we obviously cannot use this idea for the basis of radiometric dating. No assumptions are required anymore regarding the initial quantity. We can literally watch them form, even stable daughter isotopes that were only thought to have come from the decay chain process. Another amazing fact is when we looked at these early zircon crystals, as they were trapping the initial environment around them, we noticed two things that confirm biblical creation. Scientists first noticed that there was no change in magnetism in the zircon crystals, which means that there was no plate tectonic movement. Young Earth creationists made a prediction from the Bible that the Earth was a single landmass and that it broke apart during the flood, and it was young Earth creationist Antonio Snyder Pellegrini, all the way back in the 1850s, who was the first to make this scientific prediction and draw the Earth as it was once connected and then broke apart. And lastly, these crystals also showed that the Earth was not a hellish world environment like they told us, but rather, as they put it, an Eden from the very beginning. This evidence now removes the concept of abiogenesis working from both the Miller-Urey experiment conditions, which require zero oxygen, and also the other idea that life arose near thermal vents. Because without plate tectonic subduction, you don't get thermal vents in the first place. So both high oxygen levels and no plate tectonic movement destroys the two prominent views of how life began. So, young Earth creation has amazing predictive power and can answer both radiometric dating and the heat problem associated with catastrophic plate tectonics model at the same time. So far, we have just looked at two starting assumptions, and both have been entirely wrong. This rapid formation of the entire chain of radioactive isotopes, which are disproportionately higher in daughter isotopes, actually solves the lead paradox, because it means that God could have created the lead through this process, rapidly forming through the decay process, and we do not have a paradox like evolution does. You see, they found far too much radiogenic lead than there should be. Since this can only come from decay in their theory, they are forced to invoke that maybe there was a reservoir of unradiogenic lead in Earth's core. But by invoking this rescue device, then it pushes the age of the Earth back to at least 100 million years after the formation of the solar system itself. Clearly a problem. So we observed the daughter isotopes within a decay chain all form at the same time that anyone would have naturally assumed took millions and billions of years to have occurred. Yet, they were formed on the day they were discovered in these experiments. So it is not bad science that got the conclusion that the Earth was billions of years old. It was just their starting assumptions that led to the conclusions. Take away the assumptions, and the entire thing falls apart. So the next logical question anybody should ask is, why do these elements form as we see them today, and not as they would have been hundreds of millions or even billions of years ago if deep time was true? Clearly, if they had formed in ratios that mimic what we would have expected them to look like billions of years ago, then it would have been a pretty clear-cut and dry argument against young Earth creation. However, with the results actually confirming biblical creation by forming in the ratios that we see them today, now it's a problem for evolution. Now, does that mean that these isotopes do not work as clocks at all? Well, of course they do. They make amazing clocks. But you can never just assume that because they tell accurate time today, that you can now know when that clock was made. And that is the key question, and why answering this is so vital. The Bible tells us when the clock was made, and we do not have to try to interpret the clock around the assumptions of deep time anymore. But what about seafloor spreading? It moves very slowly, and we see dates that give millions and hundreds of millions of years, right?
You sure about that?
Well, we could go right to the peer-reviewed literature itself and see that radiogenic argon-40 is a direct function of both hydrostatic pressure and the rate of cooling, meaning that as lava comes out of the top of a volcano at the mid-Atlantic ridge, it flows down the side, and as it goes deeper, the more pressure there is and the colder it gets from the water, both of which affect the results by adding tremendous amounts of time. They discovered that recent lava from a volcano in the Hawaiian Islands gave a result of 22 million years, even though it was somewhere around 200 years old. So if a global flood happened between 4,400 and 5,330 years ago, we would expect the upper end age of the lava to fall within these observed ages of hyperaccelerated dating. So let's run the math using the estimated average age of these rocks of 260 years from the experiment. First, we divide 22 million by 340 million, which is the oldest age of the seafloor. This gives us 15.45. Now we are going to multiply that by 260 years, which is the estimated age of the lava today from the experiment. This results in a seafloor spreading time of just 4,017 years, based on the actual observable rates of lava flow and age. We can explain all this on the biblical timeline easily. What cannot explain these dates is evolution, and how well the observed data always matches up perfectly with young Earth creation. The statistical probability of this is beyond coincidence. So using the observable rate of change that new lava dates, we can see that the ages of the entire seafloor undeniably match young Earth creation results, and we can account for even the oldest of the seafloor bedding. Everywhere we look, we find evidence for young Earth creation in radiometric dating. Only when we look through the lens of deep time do they see what they want to see. Clearly, we cannot trust any date that comes from underwater lava flows, but what about above the ground? That's a great question, because we actually can trust at least some of these dates on land. But what methods and how far back? That is the real question. Well, we have only ever gotten accurate dates from things of known ages using carbon-14 and argon-to-argon dating methods. But we should expect these two dating methods to actually work, but only up until the flood. Take argon dating, for example. Dr. Russell Humphrey discovered that argon has a diffusion rate of only around 5,100 years, meaning we can only measure things accurately going back till the flood. After that, it doesn't even work anymore. We find the same thing with carbon-14 dating, which is our next topic. We have seen dates from carbon-14 that give results in an upward bound of 12,000 to even 50,000 years. But are these dates actually accurate? This very question was asked by an international collaborative team of scientists that wanted to know this very question. They focused specifically on the analysis of both the internal and external variability of C14 dates obtained from samples involved in the full carbon-14 dating process. 38 laboratories took part in this stage, and in total, 23 out of the 38 laboratories failed to get accurate results from a sample of known age. This is a feeble 18% accuracy from carbon dating. So again, who cares if it's only 18%? So the next logical question to ask then is, are any of these other 18% dates accurate going back tens of thousands of years? No, they're not. How can we be so sure? Easily, there's two different ways. Let's start by asking another question. If worldwide volcanism did occur like our model says it does, then radiocarbon dates results would give very old ages for anything that got tested because of this worldwide volcanic event, and since volcanic carbon dioxide is devoid of carbon-14, it would effectively be diluting the atmospheric radiocarbon concentration all over the world and make samples appear older than they actually are. And this is even known as the volcanic carbon bias. The secular view is that of uniformitarianism, which views the past as fairly constant without any catastrophic volcano event in the past 55,000 years, which is the upper end limit of C14, by the way. And in their view, since the past has to be constant, then the C14 rate is calibrated to this assumption of slow uniformity and constant rates of addition of carbon from cosmic rays over time. Again, it is their view of the past dictating the results. How do we know that their view of the past is wrong? Easy. we find uncontaminated dinosaur fossils with carbon-14 in them still, when there should be not even a single drop of C14 left. We find the same thing inside of coal, petrified wood, oil, and even diamonds.
Radiocarbon, most people think of carbon-14 or radiocarbon as being used to date rocks. Well, in fact, you can't date rocks with radiocarbon for two reasons. One, because most rocks don't contain carbon, but more importantly, radiocarbon decays very rapidly. To give you, put it in perspective, radiocarbon decays so quickly that if every atom of the Earth was radiocarbon, within just 1 million years, there'd be no radiocarbon atoms left. It will all have decayed away, which is why geologists don't use radiocarbon to, say, date fossils, simply because the fossils they believe are millions of years old. And I was involved in a research study recently where we took coal samples from coal that was 40 million years old, supposedly, down to coal that was supposedly 300 million years old. And we sent it to a major laboratory, a recognised university laboratory for radiocarbon, and every one of those coal samples contained radiocarbon in it, detectable radiocarbon. And we fully expected that they would contain radiocarbon because most of the world's major laboratories have already reported radiocarbon in coal, in limestone and fossils, but they don't think about it in terms of a true age for the rocks. And it didn't matter whether the coal was supposedly 40 million years old or 300 million years old, it had the same amount of detectable radiocarbon in it, and it gave a young age of only tens of thousands of years. Similarly, I've collected shells in rocks that are supposed to be 120 million years old in Northern California, and they also give a radiocarbon age of tens of thousands of years. Now that makes sense because the coal was laid down during Noah's flood. It's plants that were fossilised in beds during the flood. So they all were fossilised, buried and fossilised in the same year-long event. So we'd expect them to give the same radiocarbon age. Of course, those radiocarbon ages are based on the assumption that radiocarbon has always been produced in the atmosphere at the rate we find today. We know that the Earth's magnetic field was stronger in the past, which means that the radiocarbon production rate would have been slower in the past, which means that those dates are highly inflated. When we take into account what the radiocarbon was like at the time of the flood, those ages of tens of thousands of years come down to about 4,000 to 5,000 years. We even tested diamonds for radiocarbon and found that they did contain radiocarbon. Diamonds are found inside the Earth at very great depths, and they are part of the initial makeup of the Earth. So these diamonds give a young radiocarbon age, which implies that the Earth is very young. So in fact, when we look at the real hard facts of radiocarbon dating and the results that we get, we find that radiocarbon actually agrees with the Bible, confirms what the Bible has already said about Earth history, that the Earth is young and that was a global catastrophic flood.
So evolutionists, rather than directly deal with the consequences of this data, the secular community and critics do what they always do, and either ignore it or just claim that it is contamination and move on, ignoring the proverbial elephant in the room. Dr. John Baumgartner has already shown that the C14 found in diamonds is intrinsic to the diamond. The so-called contamination was actually the silver powder effect, and why only some samples showed it. This silver powder was used to improve thermal conductivity during testing, and the powder is what influenced the measurement. So to clarify, the silver powder affected the ion current measurement, leading to higher C14 readings in those specific samples, making it appear as though they were contaminated. That is why only the specific samples treated with silver powder showed the correlation between lower ion current and higher C14 levels. Clearly, if all of the C14 in samples were there from contamination, then they would have all shown the same signs of contamination the same. Instead, only those that were treated with silver powder showed this. So it is clear that there is no contamination, and the critics are literally just grasping at straws because this means that there is intrinsic carbon-14 in diamonds, which falsifies deep time. They have already admitted their biases in the past. It is up to you to see through the lies and think for yourself and do your own research, and you will easily see through the lies of evolution. They are everywhere. And are you noticing a theme? All of these things that the secular evolutionary community present as evidence for being old, actually, all of them also show evidence of their youth. Now think about this. If Noah's flood was true, wouldn't we find a vast majority of all oil in a single geological rock layer, or at least between two of them, that had formed during the global flood event? Well, yeah, and that is exactly what we do find, with over 70% of all oil in the Mesozoic rock layers alone, and 10% in its connecting layer, the Paleozoic. Only 20% of all other oil is found in a different rock layer. All of this fits so perfectly with our model. So in conclusion, we have C14, argon, and helium in things that supposedly are millions and even billions of years old, which should not be there. The diffusion rates of both argon and helium have upper limit bounds of just thousands of years, and C14 should not be in anything older than 55,000 years max. We have radio halos that shouldn't exist according to conventional wisdom. And with the discovery that shows that basically 50% of all radiometric dating methods do not agree with one another in the same sample, it's even worse for evolution. And then you top that with the observable data showing elements forming just days earlier that can date millions and even billions of years old, even though they had just formed in the lab. And also that massively disproportionate amounts of daughter isotopes also form, which rapidly decay into their stable decay chain element. Without the slow process of deep time requirement, then we can easily put radiometric dating to bed and answer this as young Earth creationists. The majority of dating methods all validate young Earth creation. And now, finally, the last piece of the puzzle for young Earth creation, which was radiometric dating, has been solved through observational, testable, repeatable studies from independent laboratories, and we do not need accelerated nuclear decay. To me, it's sad when people have to try to force-fit ever-changing pagan naturalism into the Bible because they think there is no alternative. I realize that not everyone knows or even likes science that much, but just to hand-wave it all away and agree with evolutionism because you don't understand it is not a good reason. The Bible contradicts the secular timeline in many ways, so why even bother trying to force-fit the data to try and work in the first place? It's not going to. Do you really think that young Earth creation is what's keeping the secular atheist community from converting? If so, you have deceived yourself. Just think about it. If it really was only young Earth creation keeping them from believing, then why aren't they converting to theistic evolution version of Christianity, which Christians admit is totally compatible anyway? They're not converting because it has nothing to do with young Earth creation or evolution. It's a heart problem, not a head problem. So compromising scripture to align with this pagan theory of evolution nonsense, all for people who hate you anyway, all to try to what, not look silly, shows you have little faith in scripture and rather worry more about man's view and opinion of you instead. Remember, the Bible tells us to be ready at a moment's notice to give answer for why we believe. Believe what? Scripture, of course. So if you cannot answer, that's fine, but at least direct them to somebody who can or does have the answers. Some of you are new Christians, so it's not expected of you to know everything. Just know that the answers are out there. And we here at Standing for Truth Ministries are fighting against the lies of evolution for everyone, including you. So I hope that you enjoy this movie on the quest for the age of the Earth. If you have not seen our other quest series, I recommend you do. If you want to learn more about this topic and others, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our website where you can find anything you are looking for on biblical ancestry and much more. Until next time.